Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nabilah, Khaleeda dan ini AWANI. Kita mulakan dengan perkembangan berikut. Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim berkata, sasaran nilai perdagangan dua hala antara Malaysia dan Turki sebanyak $10 bilion dalam tempoh beberapa tahun akan datang adalah sasaran yang realistik dan tidak terlalu bercita-cita besar. Malah tegasnya dengan perancangan yang tepat, sasaran itu mempunyai potensi untuk dicapai lebih awal daripada jangkaan.
Ketika menyampaikan kenyataan bersama Presiden Recep Tayyip Erdogan di Kompleks Presiden di Ankara pada Rabu malam, Anwar berkata keyakinan itu berasaskan kekuatan ekonomi Turki yang dinamik dan pertumbuhan pesat sektor teknologi baharu di Malaysia.
And that's why I think we will continue to enhance trade and bilateral trade investments. I mean, the aim of $10 billion is not ambitious at all. I mean, you have a great economy, and we, of course, relatively smaller, but then growing at a very fast pace. As you know, we have now become the main attraction for semiconductors, AI, data centers, and new technology, new areas such as rare earth, etc. And I think this sort of collaboration should be more meaningful, not only in terms of traditional level of trade, but also new disciplines which will be cemented through educational research collaboration between our two countries.
Beliau sebelum itu mempengerusikan mesyuarat Majlis Kerjasama Strategik Peringkat Tinggi Malaysia-Turki bersama Erdogan di Ankara. Mereka mengadakan pertemuan empat mata bagi membincangkan kerjasama dua hala dan isu-isu serantau dan antarabangsa. Perdana Menteri kini berada di Ankara bagi lawatan rasmi pertama beliau ke Turki sebagai Perdana Menteri yang bermula pada 6 Januari sebelum berakhir di Istanbul pada 8 Januari ini. Dalam pada itu, Perdana Menteri berkata kedudukan Malaysia sebagai destinasi pelaburan utama dalam rantaian bekalan teknologi termasuk semikonduktor dan nadir bumi memberikan asas kukuh untuk memperluas kerjasama perdagangan dengan Turki. Beliau turut menegaskan bahawa persetujuan kedua-dua negara untuk menaik taraf hubungan melalui High Level Strategic Cooperation Council HLSCC membuktikan komitmen bersama untuk memperkasa perdagangan, pelaburan dan hubungan ekonomi pada tahap lebih tersusun.
Dalam pada itu, Malaysia terus mengukuhkan kedudukan diplomatiknya di pentas antarabangsa apabila Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim menerima Order of the Republic. Anugerah itu salah satu penghormatan tertinggi Republik Turki yang disampaikan oleh Presiden Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Antara lain, penganugerahan itu diberikan sebagai pengiktirafan terhadap usaha berterusan Malaysia memperkukuh hubungan dua hala termasuk kerjasama strategik merentasi pelbagai sektor antara kedua-dua negara. Dalam kenyataan beliau, Perdana Menteri menzahirkan rasa syukur dan rendah diri atas pengiktirafan tersebut sambil menegaskan bahawa anugerah itu bukan diterima atas kapasiti peribadi, sebaliknya bagi pihak seluruh rakyat Malaysia. Jelas Anwar, penghormatan turut menjadi cerminan keakraban persahabatan yang telah lama terjalin antara Malaysia dan Turki, berteraskan kepercayaan, saling menghormati serta aspirasi bersama untuk keamanan dan kemakmuran sejagat. Order of the Republic lazimnya dikurniakan kepada ketua kerajaan asing yang mainkan peranan signifikan dalam mempererat hubungan dengan Turki termasuk dalam aspek diplomasi, keselamatan, perdagangan dan pembangunan. Perdana Menteri turut berharap penganugerahan itu menjadi pemangkin kepada kerjasama lebih kukuh antara Malaysia dan Turki, khususnya dalam bidang strategik yang memberi manfaat langsung kepada rakyat kedua-dua negara. Lawatan rasmi Perdana Menteri ke Turki dari 6 hingga 8 Januari merupakan sebahagian daripada usaha memperluas kerjasama dua hala termasuk dalam sektor pertahanan, teknologi, perdagangan, pendidikan serta bantuan kemanusiaan. Wisma Putra sebelum ini berkata selain pertemuan empat mata dengan Presiden Erdogan, delegasi Malaysia dijadual mengadakan sesi lebat urus bersama pemimpin kanan Turki, pemain industri serta institusi strategik bagi meneroka peluang kerjasama baharu. Lawatan ini juga dijangka memperkukuh hubungan yang telah lama terjalin antara kedua-dua negara, terutama selepas peningkatan kerjasama pertahanan dan perdagangan dalam beberapa tahun kebelakangan ini.
Baik, Malaysia kini memasuki tahun 2026 dengan tumpuan besar terhadap reformasi tenaga kerja sejajar dengan Hala 7 Belanjawan 2026 di bawah kerangka ekonomi madani yang meletakkan rakyat sebagai pusat pembangunan ekonomi. Kementerian Sumber Manusia Kesuma bersama Talent Corp kini menggerakkan pelan yang lebih terarah untuk mengukuhkan ekosistem bakat negara di tengah-tengah perubahan struktur ekonomi yang menuntut kemahiran lebih kompleks dalam sektor digital, teknologi hijau dan industri bernilai tinggi. Data pasaran buruh menunjukkan keperluan mendesak untuk memperbaiki badanan pekerjaan, meningkatkan produktiviti pekerja dan menangani isu upah permulaan graduan yang masih perlahan meningkat. Dan pada masa yang sama, Malaysia perlu mempercepat penyertaan tenaga kerja wanita, belia serta memperkasa laluan mobiliti kerjaya melalui TVET dan universiti. Dan dengan cabaran global seperti automasi, AI, mobiliti bakat serantau dan persaingan menarik pelaburan, strategi tenaga kerja kini bukan lagi soal menyediakan pelatih tetapi memastikan setiap ringgit pelaburan latihan memberi hasil yang boleh diukur termasuk peningkatan gaji, produktiviti dan daya saing firma. Jadi kita bersama dengan Raja Hamzah Abidin Raja Nongcik, ahli Lembaga Pengarah Talent Corp untuk kita mengulas lanjut. Baik, selamat pagi Hamzah. Untuk tahun baru ni 2026, mungkin kalau Hamzah boleh kongsikan apa 3 strategic priorities Talent Corp di bawah kerangka ekonomi madani dan bagaimana kejayaannya akan diukur secara kuantitatif.
Selamat tahun baru kepada semua. I think now is an interesting time for Talent Corp dengan menteri baru, Dr. Sri Ramanan dengan some of his strategic initiatives as well. Tapi I think in the Talent Corp, it's business as usual. 3 things that are the big focus, which is one, bridging the talent gap. Kita dah menyumbang banyak kepada talent gap di Malaysia ini. But at the same time, we have created this Future Skills Talent Council. So it's a council that's sector dependent. So there's a focus council on data center, on aviation, on a lot of different sectors. Consultations done. So again, I think one focus is how do we bridge the talent gap between different sectors. Number 2 is improving employability. So finding the AI skills gap. For example, how do we train up our online sellers, our social sellers, and this is done through a program called MyNIISe, bridging the talent gap. I think one other strategic initiative which is actually very impactful is empowering the new workforce, right? So talking about bringing women back to the workforce, bringing army people back to the workforce. I think, again, Talent Corp, a lot of people think when you're about Talent Corp, it's about bringing talent back to Malaysia, but actually a lot of it now we do work is to improve talent in Malaysia and to upskill talent in Malaysia.
So new year, new minister and perhaps new goals as well. So kalau kita lihat ekosistem bakat sebagai satu sistem lah, di mana binding constraint paling besar hari ini kalau Hamzah lihat, mungkin dari segi skills mismatch, a weak signalling between education also industry, or is it limited career mobility? And what are the few high impact interventions that Talent Corp is prioritizing over the next 12 to 18 months?
I think all the factors you mentioned contribute to the constraints. Whether it's a skills mismatch, whether it's between industry and between government, there's always everything plays a part. But I think there are tremendous opportunities out there now from a talent perspective. Sebab I think this generational change in terms of AI, in terms of what the industry needs, is affecting all industries. I just yesterday runs accounting wants to meet the talent gap that they're having. So I think a lot more focus on practical talent. But I feel that this means that all industry and stakeholders like us have to work a bit closer together versus before, because now a lot of what we talked before about the last 10 years is no longer relevant in this market.
And we know that Kesuma and Talent Corp always emphasize on whole of government coordination. So practically, bagaimana kita boleh move towards a single view of talent merentas HRD Corp, Perkeso, MOE dan juga TVET, especially dari segi data interoperability and also shared KPIs and accountability at the same time?
I think that's the difficult part. I think, for example, TVET, bukannya Kesuma je dia ada di KBS and a few other ministries that also manage TVET. It's one of the more, obviously, difficult issues to manage. Yeah. But I think the key part now, as a talent ministry, they would say, we are in charge of talent and Talent Corp is in charge of
a lot of developing the think tank for the ministry. I think in terms of how we always work with different ministries. I think last year in Q4 we worked with Ministry of Women to launch a program in World Economic Forum on bringing back women to the workforce. I think we also do a program with, I think, other ministries as well. So again, there's no choice. I think we have to be from the hub of a lot of the talent initiatives, but at the same time, we can't do it ourselves. We have to work with the different ministries. But I think the key part is always, as an agency, we are a bit more flexible. We are able to work with different ministries quite effectively. But again, semua kena add value lah. Kalau we don't add value, the other ministries will want to work with us. So I think we've always been very clear to the outcomes we want, and we also work with different stakeholders, both government and non-government stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Hamzah, we always talk about upskilling and also reskilling. So daripada pelbagai skill list yang wujud hari ini, mungkin apa 10 skills lah that truly matter for Malaysia in 2026, bukan secara umum tapi yang ada clear demand signals from industry, and how will skills passport and also micro credentials reduce friction in hiring, also shorten time to productivity?
Okay, so in terms of skill list, I think that we've actually did a study and see which are the skills that are lacking in the market. One anecdote I always like to tell to people is one of the skills that is needed or there's a shortage in the market now is actually social sellers online. I was speaking to one of the online companies. There's about 2 million social sellers online at the moment. So I think 1 in every 15 Malaysians are selling something online. So I think in terms of the skills list, I think that's still dynamic. I know you asked for top 10, but I think we have a full list of jobs that we need, skills that we need in the market that we publish online. But in terms of where we see it, that's how we work very close with the industry. I mean, in the likes of the semiconductor industry, like Inari, with the local companies like Boeing, in terms of international companies, also local companies we work with like Farmfresh. So again, work with everyone to identify what are the skills that are needed, and then work with the different institutions to develop those skills accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And another thing we want to look at is dari segi latihan tenaga kerja yang bukan dilihat sebagai cost saja tapi sebagai investment juga. Tapi bagaimana Talent Corp nak pastikan peralihan kepada outcome based training models di mana funding is tied to employment outcomes, productivity gains or wage progression, and how do we audit real impact after 6 to 12 months?
Okay, so I think our approach is always cost sharing with the industry. What does that mean is anything we don't do it ourselves, but we also make sure the industry don't do it themselves. I think the internship is one example, right? We give a sort of a subsidy for every internship that's given in the market, so that employees who still pay an internship fee, you subsidize part of the cost. So again, the idea is always to empower the industry to hire more. So again, talent is always, in a way, a cost, but good talent means investment. And good talent is what determines between a good company and a not so good company. So kalau you think what Talent Corp is doing, I think it's very much focused on what industry wants. And then we work with industry to bridge part of the gap. So again, for a company wanting to invest, you do have to invest as much as you need so that you actually can get quicker ROI. So that helps create a win-win situation for both us as a government agency and also them as a corporate or a company.
Understood. But in a world where talent is mobile, how does Malaysia compete not just to attract but to retain also circulate talent? So what is Talent Corp strategy on domestic mobility, diaspora engagement, also earn and learn pathways, and are there sector-specific targets from 2026 to 2028, Raja?
So if I looking at it from a larger perspective, right? I think there's a big focus on empowering local talent. As much as we try to encourage as much expats to come in, I think local talent is key to creating a strong and high-income society. Bringing good talent back to the workforce is important, meaning that we have women who's been out of the workforce, good army people who've been out of the workforce. How do you bring them back, empowering them back to the talent? Number 3 is being very focused. We, as a country, have limited bullets, so we want to work with the industries that are growing. So I think that's why we speak a lot to the semicon industry, to the data center industry. We can't talk to every single industry, but we try to empower high impact industries to grow and to help bridge their talent gap. But again, I think in terms of every sector, we do have slightly different targets. But the good part is we are talking to the key stakeholders of each sector. So we're not doing it ourselves. It's not, just talent corp ourselves thinking, X, Y, Z to do. We work with industry to do it. And again, the ideas will always be industry focused versus reshops and redoing it ourselves.
Okay, one last question, Hamza. In 1 minute, if you had to name at least one non-negotiable deliverables for 2026, what would they be and who owns them? And what are the key execution risks and how does Talent Corp ensure delivery discipline, so productivity and also wage outcomes stay on track?
I think the thing, what we talk a lot about at the board meetings and all that, again, I don't speak for management. I just speak for me personally. I think the AI talent gap is the key, right? In the government, it's already giving good subsidies in terms of training for AI. We also push that very aggressively. So I think in terms of where we're going, where the industry is going, we have to bridge this AI talent gap because it may cause huge disruption in the job market. But again, at the same time, we have to be ahead of the curve because it is extremely competitive. The likes of Singapore, Vietnam, our peers are all catching up or ahead of us, right? So we always have to catch up in terms of where our talent's placed. But again, at the same time, some tailwinds. I think there's a lot of companies looking at Malaysia now, given the stability and the growth in the past few years. So I think we are basically at the forefront of growth in Southeast Asia.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. That was Raja Hamza Abidin, Raja Nongji, the Board of Director for Talent Corp. Thank you so much for your insights and time. And kita teruskan dengan perkembangan seterusnya. Kerajaan tidak akan mengurangkan kuota subsidi budi madani RON 95 mengikut kelas pendapatan bagi mengelak beban tambahan ke atas perbelanjaan isi rumah. Ketua Setiausaha Perbendaharaan Datuk Johan Mahmud American berkata, keutamaan ketika ini adalah menilai data penggunaan program budi 95 bagi menentukan keberkesanan.
Johan Mahmud menyatakan kerajaan perlu menganalisis data dikumpul sejak pelaksanaan budi 95 bagi mengenal pasti sebarang penggunaan luar biasa sebelum mempertimbangkan perubahan terhadap parameter program berkenaan. Beliau menegaskan pelaksanaan budi 95 merupakan satu perubahan besar kepada negara. Justru kerajaan tidak berhasrat melakukan terlalu banyak pelarasan dalam tempoh jangka pendek. Mengenai kota 300 liter sebulan, data kerajaan menunjukkan purata penggunaan hanyalah sekitar 83 liter sebulan, manakala 90% penerima menggunakan kurang daripada 200 liter sebulan. Beliau turut menjelaskan kerajaan buat masa ini tidak akan melaksanakan subsidi yang lebih bersasar mengikut kelas pendapatan meskipun terdapat cadangan untuk mekanisme yang lebih tepat. Sebaliknya, kerajaan akan memberi tumpuan kepada usaha menghapuskan kebocoran subsidi termasuk penggunaan warga asing atau syarikat bagi memastikan lebih ramai rakyat Malaysia mendapat manfaat budi 95.
Menteri Pelancongan Seni dan Budaya Datuk Seri Tiong King Sing mengarahkan mekanisme jaminan bank segera dilaksanakan sebagai syarat mandatory kepada agensi pelancongan yang menawarkan pakej umrah. Beliau berkata langkah itu penting untuk memastikan wang jemaah sentiasa dilindungi dan pampasan dapat disalurkan tanpa kelewatan sekiranya berlaku penipuan, kecuaian atau kegagalan agensi melaksanakan sesuatu pakej umrah.
Dalam satu kenyataan, beliau berkata langkah ini bukan beban kepada pengusaha yang jujur, sebaliknya satu tindakan tegas untuk membina sebuah ekosistem pelancongan yang selamat dan boleh dipercayai serta mengembalikan keyakinan rakyat. Tiong berkata demikian susulan laporan kejadian 36 jemaah umrah terkandas di Madinah baru-baru ini yang disampaikan kepada Kementerian Pelancongan, Seni dan Budaya (MOTAC) melalui Kedutaan Besar Malaysia di Riyadh. Kesemua mereka selamat tiba di Terminal 2 Lapangan Terbang Antarabangsa Kuala Lumpur KLIA pada Selasa. Mengenai syarikat yang mengendalikan perjalanan 36 jemaah umrah itu, beliau berkata MOTAC telah menjalankan penggeledahan, merakam percakapan pihak syarikat dan jemaah yang terlibat serta membuka kertas siasatan. Sementara itu, Tiong berkata MOTAC telah melaksanakan 64 operasi penguatkuasaan serta mengambil tindakan penggantungan dan pembatalan lesen terhadap agensi yang melanggar undang-undang sejak 2023 hingga Oktober tahun lepas. Beliau berkata dalam tempoh tersebut, 4 lesen agensi pelancongan telah digantung manakala 2 lesen telah dibatalkan. Namun, kejadian yang terus berulang menunjukkan pendekatan sedia ada perlu diperketat dan diperkukuh. Sehubungan itu, Motek menyeru orang ramai sentiasa menyemak status lesen agensi pelancongan sebelum membuat sebarang bayaran dan melaporkan sebarang penyelewengan dengan segera agar tindakan pantas dapat diambil.
Prasarana Malaysia Berhad memberi tumpuan kepada pengukuhan kesaling hubungan pengangkutan awam pada 2026 sebagai pemangkin produktiviti bandar dan kecekapan ekonomi sejajar peranannya sebagai pengendali utama sistem rel serta bas di bawah jenama Rapid KL dan Rapid Mining. Menteri Pengangkutan Anthony Loke berkata, strategi itu menyasarkan penyampaian perkhidmatan yang lebih konsisten, selamat dan mesra pengguna sekaligus menyokong pertumbuhan permintaan jangka panjang serta memaksimumkan pulangan sosio-ekonomi daripada pelaburan kerajaan dalam sektor pengangkutan awam. Jadi untuk mengulas lanjut tentang perkara ini, kita bersama dengan Profesor Media Teknologis Dr. Muhammad Fahmi Abdullah, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Metro System Academy Universiti Tun Hussein On Malaysia. Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi Prof. Kalau Prof boleh kongsikanlah. Boleh kongsikan mungkin macam mana, bagaimana Prof menilai keupayaan Pelan Pengangkutan Awam 2026 untuk kita lihat benar-benar mengurangkan masa perjalanan rakyat dan meningkatkan kebolehpercayaan perkhidmatan itu, dan mungkin dua faktor utama yang menyumbang kepada produktiviti bandar. Silakan Prof.
Terima kasih Nabilah. Okey, kalau kita lihat kepada Pelan Pengangkutan Awam 2026 ni, dia lebih memfokuskan kepada bagaimana pihak kerajaan ataupun negara kita untuk meningkatkan kecekapan dan juga meningkatkan kesaling hubungan di antara rel dan juga bas di kawasan bandar. Dan kalau kita lihat daripada konteks produktiviti sebenarnya, dua faktor utama yang saya rasa yang boleh difokuskan. Yang pertama sekali adalah daripada aspek kita meningkatkan lagi aspek prestasi operasi, kekerapan yang boleh kita mengurangkan masa perjalanan harian tu. Kalau kita lihat dekat kawasan Lembah Kelang, kita habis masa dekat jalan raya tu lebih kurang dalam 44 jam sebulan. Jadi kalau misalnya satu hari tu kita ada 8 jam, sekurang-kurangnya 2 jam kita habiskan masa dalam atas jalan raya. Jadi daripada situ, kalau kita lihat, kalau ikut ekonomi pengangkutan sendiri, kalau purata gaji sejam tu, seorang tu adalah RM7. Jadi kalau kita darabkan dengan 2 jam, kita darabkan juga dengan 22 hari bekerja sebulan, maksudnya seorang pekerja itu akan hilang produktivitinya lebih kurang dalam 308 jam sebulan. Jadi itu baru seorang. Kalau misalnya kita lihatlah 10% jumlah pekerja yang terperangkap dalam kesesakan itu, kita akan rugi lebih kurang, negara akan rugi lebih kurang 5 bilion setahun. Jadi ini yang dikatakan sebagai kerugian produktiviti. Maksudnya prestasi operasi kekerapan itu perlu dilaksanakan supaya ia dapat menyumbang kepada produktiviti bandar. Yang kedua daripada aspek rangkaian. Rangkaian antara rel dan juga bandar, rel dan juga bas ini perlu disaling hubungkan dengan lebih kerap. Kerana ia dapat mempercepatkan akses, akan dapat mempercepatkan akses untuk pergi ke tempat kerja, kita pergi ke suatu kawasan yang kita nak tuju, shopping mall dan juga untuk perkhidmatan harian. Kalau saya nampak senario contohnya, kita lihat kepada Lembah Kelang. Kalau rel ni saya nampak frekuensi operasi train itu perlu dipertingkatkan. Kalau dulu kekerapan ketibaan rel itu 10 minit, mungkin dicepatkan menjadi 5 minit. Yang pertama. Yang kedua, jumlah gerabak. Kalau dulu gerabak mungkin ada 5 gerabak. Mungkin kita sekarang ni kita nak menambah supaya kapasiti penumpang itu dapat ditingkatkan. Dan akhirnya dia dapat memboleh kebolehpercayaan, maksudnya meningkatkan kebolehpercayaan. Pada masa yang sama tidak adalah gangguan teknikal daripada aspek cuaca, contohnya banjir dan sebagainya. Kalau bas pula, bas ni adalah salah satu aspek yang sangat penting di mana ia merupakan feeder kepada rel. Maksudnya kesaling hubungan daripada luar kawasan ke dalam stesen kereta api. First and last mile itu sangat penting. Dan pada masa yang sama, kalau kita lihat kepada bas, sekarang ni banyak bas ni digunakan oleh warga asing. Jadi kita kena upgrade sikit daripada aspek tempat menunggu, daripada aspek perjalanan. Jadi kita boleh laksanakanlah modal share. Maksudnya fokus Pelan Pengangkutan 2026 ni, kerajaan cuba untuk mengembalikan keyakinan rakyat untuk menggunakan pengangkutan rel, pada masa yang sama dapat memperkukuhkan lagi ataupun meningkatkan lagi kepercayaan kepada pengangkutan bas.
Baik, itu adalah
saya.
Itu adalah antara faktor-faktor yang Prof telah kongsikan menyumbang kepada produktiviti bandar. Sebab bila kita bincang soal produktiviti ini, ramai yang tak sedar sebenarnya sistem rel dan juga bas juga mainkan peranan besar dalam mengurangkan masa perjalanan dan juga kos sara hidup untuk rakyat-rakyat Malaysia. Jadi kalau kita nak beralih kepada apa yang menyumbang kepada kos sara hidup dan produktiviti bandar itu, kerajaan memilih untuk kekalkan dengan My50 Pass walaupun hak subsidi mula terjejas dan juga tuntutan melebihi bajet asal. Jadi subsidi My50 yang digunakan lebih kurang 260,000 penumpang sebulan. Pada pandangan Prof, sejauh mana skim ini menyokong pengurangan kos sara hidup dan memudahkan mobiliti pekerja di kawasan metropolitan, Prof?
Okey, pengenalan subsidi My50 ini sebenarnya adalah salah satu insentif yang pihak kerajaan berikan kepada pengguna. Kerana sebenarnya pertama untuk menjadi daya tarikan pengguna menggunakan pengangkutan awam. Pada masa yang sama mungkinlah boleh dikatakan sebagai untuk menjadikan kos pengangkutan awam itu adalah lebih mampu milik. Okey, dan pada masa yang sama sebenarnya ia salah satu agenda untuk kita menarik ini pengguna baru, terutamanya golongan pekerja yang berada di kawasan bandar dan juga pelajar di kawasan sekitarnya lah. Namun kita kena melihat daripada aspek keberkesanan jangka masa panjang. Adakah pihak kerajaan hanya bergantung kepada subsidi My50 saja? Okey, kerana kita perlu ada satu sistem sokongan dasar di mana untuk meningkatkan kualiti perkhidmatan itu sendiri. Mungkin kita boleh cadangkan pihak kerajaan boleh laksanakan, kita tambahkan lagi program bukan hanya kepada subsidi My50. Sebagai contoh, kita memperkenalkan MyPass National di mana mengintegrasikan bukan setakat hanya spesifik kepada satu train saja perkhidmatan tetapi juga kepada bas, LRT, MRT, KTM dan sebagainya. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua mungkin memberikan insentif, reward. Sesiapa yang menggunakan contohnya pengangkutan awam ini dapat diskaun, mungkin berikan peluang untuk tiket percuma dan sebagainya selain daripada mereka yang menggunakan pas My50 ini. Dan pada masa yang sama juga boleh memperkenalkan juga, ini mungkin satu bentuk pelaburan, tapi boleh memperkenalkan juga daripada aspek tambang murah, di mana tambang murah ini boleh ditawarkan pada waktu yang bukan puncak. Mereka yang menggunakan pengangkutan awam di waktu yang bukan puncak boleh menggunakan perkhidmatan ini dengan tambang yang murah. Dan mungkin siapa yang naik kereta api kerap, siapa yang naik bas ini mungkin dapat diskaun. Kita boleh integrasikan dengan syarikat-syarikat yang lain untuk contohnya mendapat diskaun membeli barangan dapur. Jadi membeli barangan dapur, mendapat diskaun pergi beli minuman, beli makanan dan sebagainya. Jadi perkara-perkara ini walaupun kita nampak di idea dia adalah sangat mudah, tapi matlamat saya adalah kos sara hidup dapat kurangkan. Mereka enjoy, mereka menikmati pengalaman bukan setakat bila pergi menaiki pengangkutan awam tu, mereka dapat diskaun lagi untuk membeli peralatan contoh barang-barang dapur dan sebagainya. Kita kena faham budaya masyarakat Malaysia ni sejak lahirnya memang kita menggunakan pengangkutan persendirian kereta dan sebagainya. Jadi kita nak ubah persepsi tu macam mana kita nak jadi tarikan. Business model tu kena tepat untuk mengikut cita rasa budaya orang Malaysia untuk kita dapat menarik perhatian pengguna menggunakan pengangkutan awam. Nabilah.
Kita lihat ada satu pengumuman di mana 250 hentian bas baru akan dibina bagi memperkukuh akses first mile dan juga last mile. Jadi pada khidmat Prof lah, di mana titik kelemahan paling kritikal dalam rangkaian semasa dan juga bagaimana hentian baru ni boleh menangani jurang itu. Sebab kalau kita lihat sekarang dalam konteks rel dengan bas tu, prestasi rel dan bas makin baik tapi gangguan masih berlaku. Tapi adakah dengan penambahan hentian bas ini boleh menjadi solusi kepada permasalahan ini, Prof?
Bagi saya adalah cabaran dan juga kelemahan utama kita adalah daripada aspek sambungan feeder di antara bas dan juga hentian kereta api. Kerana banyak kawasan yang tidak dapat di-cover oleh pihak bas, mengakibatkan pengguna ni sukar untuk bergerak daripada rumah kepada stesen. Kita tengoklah pattern pengguna kita. Kalau boleh pengangkutan tu mesti berada di depan rumah untuk terus pergi ke tempat apa yang nak dituju dan sebagainya. Jadi macam mana nak ubah tu, maksudnya sambungan feeder tu mesti mesti dikerapkan, mesti ditambah dan sebagainya. Okey, kita tahu pihak kerajaan dah nyatakan nak membina hentian bas, 250 hentian bas untuk menampung support sokongan sistem rel ini. Tetapi bila dah bina perkara ini, yang pertama sekali pihak kerajaan kena selaraskan rangkaian dan juga jadual. Maksudnya bas ni adalah feeder. Okey, bas feeder dan juga bas perlu memberikan sokongan kepada train. Jadi jadual bas tu yang nak dilaksanakan itu perlulah diselaraskan dengan jadual train. Kena perlu berpaksikan kepada stesen rail. Maksudnya kalau misalnya bas itu kena sampai 5 minit sebelum train bergerak. Jadi itu salah satu daripada aspek yang perlu diambil titik beratkan oleh pihak kerajaan dan juga industri. Yang kedua, salah satunya adalah sistem sokongan yang boleh kita tambah adalah kita memperluaskan had pertukaran mikro, iaitu pengangkutan berasaskan permintaan. Alhamdulillah, okey, on demand. On demand ini perlu diperluaskan kerana kita tidak semestinya hanya bergantung kepada stesen bas. Mungkin checkpoint yang berada di kawasan yang boleh kita cover tanpa kerajaan mengeluarkan jumlah pertukaran yang tinggi, tetapi memberikan keselesaan supaya capaian feeder ini dapat diperluaskan daripada satu kawasan ke stesen rail. Dan kalau kita nak memperluaskan aspek laluan bas dalam suatu jalan itu, mestilah perlu diintegrasikan juga dengan teknologi supaya ia dapat diperluaskan. Dan perkara ini sebenarnya ia memberikan peningkatan kepada produktiviti dan juga kemajuan sebuah bandar. Dan pembangunan bandar, kalau kita lihat sekarang ni, kerajaan cuba untuk menambah baik perancangan bandar itu. Dan kalau boleh kita tetapkan daripada aspek radius 400 hingga 800 meter di kawasan stesen itu, perlulah ada pejalan kaki dan juga bus feeder dan mengurangkan tempat letak kereta. Jadi akhirnya perkara ini sebenarnya boleh mengintegrasikan daripada satu kawasan kepada satu kawasan, terutamanya kepada stesen rail. Nabilah.
Baik Prof, sebenarnya banyak lagi persoalan yang saya nak tanyakan kepada Prof, tapi masa tidak banyak. Jadi untuk waktu ini terima kasih diucapkan kepada Profesor Madya Teknologis Dr. Fahmi Abdullah, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Metro System Academy UTHM. Semoga kita jumpa pada waktu yang lain, dan pada waktu ini kita akan berhenti rehat seketika. Kita kembali selepas ini.
Herbal Essences melembutkan dan menyilatkan semula rambut anda dengan 100% pati tumbuhan sebenar seperti minyak argan dan aloe. Menutrisi secara mendalam untuk rambut lembut dan berkilat semula, bebas daripada paraben, parafin dan pewarna. Herbal Essences.
Big moment. Catch us if you can. Isn't that just gorgeous? Incredible tennis. Unbelievable. Absolutely amazing. What a race! Oh, that's nice. Wow. Good hit. Oh, yes! And here we go.
Acara sukan secara langsung dan banyak lagi hanya di Astro.
Ada yang perdebatan bahawa GST perlu dikembalikan semula kerana ada yang mempertikaikan bahawa SST itu tidak efektif.
Isu buruh kanak-kanak bukan sahaja dalam bentuk fizikal tetapi juga bentuk moden yang lebih licik dan juga terselindung.
Kita tengok buruh kanak-kanak dan ada juga buruh paksa kanak-kanak.
Kumpulan FB dikenali sebagai grup budak-budak sekolah rendah yang didakwa menyebarkan gambar remaja perempuan tidak senonoh telah pun ditutup.
Kau kerja dengan Tony Reza? Can't blame me. Belong to kau. I heard a lot about you in the academy. Good ref. I tahu you tak suka email.
Itu tugas undang-undang. Mak cakap dia pencuri.
Tapi dia bukan jahat. Dia tak bunuh orang.
Jangan kejar Tony.
Oh, Inspektor Iman. Kau yang sumbat aku dalam ni.
Bah. Adcom. Stream episod terbaru dahulu, eksklusif on demand dan 9 malam di Astro Citra.
Bertemu kembali. Harga runcit petrol RON 97 dan RON 95 tanpa subsidi di seluruh negara diturunkan sebanyak 5 sen dan 2 sen masing-masing kepada RM3.11 dan RM2.54 seliter bagi tempoh 8 hingga 14 Januari 2026. Kementerian Kewangan MOF dalam kenyataannya memaklumkan harga diesel di Semenanjung Malaysia juga diturunkan sebanyak 5 sen kepada RM2.89 seliter bagi tempoh sama. Manakala Sabah, Sarawak dan Labuan kekal pada RM2.15 seliter. Harga runcit petrol bersubsidi RON 95 di bawah Budi Madani ataupun Budi 95 kekal pada RM1.99 seliter. Kenyataan MOF tersebut menyebut kerajaan akan terus memantau perkembangan pasaran dan menyelaras harga runcit RON 97, RON 95 dan diesel dengan mengambil kira pergerakan harga pasaran minyak dan juga menyokong kestabilan harga. Ia menambah kerajaan juga akan terus memantau kesan perubahan harga minyak mentah dunia serta mengambil langkah yang bersesuaian bagi memastikan kebajikan dan kesejahteraan rakyat terus terpelihara. Kementerian Dalam Negeri KDN akan melaksanakan MyDigital ID sebagai platform log masuk tunggal bagi rakyat Malaysia yang mengakses aplikasi mudah alih National Integrated Immigration System bermula 15 Januari 2026. Bagi pelawat asing pula akan terus menggunakan kaedah log masuk sedia ada tanpa sebarang perubahan. Pelaksanaan MyDigital ID sebagai sistem log masuk tunggal adalah sebahagian daripada inisiatif MyNIISe yang bertujuan mengesahkan identiti pengguna secara tepat dan selamat melalui pangkalan data Jabatan Pendaftaran Negara tanpa menyimpan data peribadi pengguna. Jadi untuk mengulas lanjut tentang perkara ini, kita bersama dengan Muhammad Sirajuddin Jalil, Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Cyber Malaysia MCCA. Baik Siraj, mungkin sedikit pandangan Siraj lah mewakili MCCA mengenai kewajipan MyDigital ID ini sebagai log masuk tunggal untuk MyNIISe mulai 15 Januari 2026 dan adakah ia wajar dilaksanakan sekarang?
Untuk sekarang ni pelaksanaan digital ID menggantikan log masuk tradisional, yang mana log masuk tradisional ni untuk secara umumnya adalah kaedah kita menggunakan ID dan password. Sebelum ni biasanya kalau aplikasi kerajaan ni kita akan masukkan nombor IC kita tu, biasanya akan jadi ID kita dan kita akan create password mengikut pilihan masing-masing lah, yang mana rata-ratanya pengguna ni akan culas lah buat password. Ada yang buat password tu buat password 123 ataupun ABCD 123. Banyaklah orang buat password-password seperti itu yang akhirnya menjejaskan keselamatan cyber bukan hanya terhadap orang tu, bahkan sebab dia culas akhirnya ada penggodam exploit dia untuk masuk ke dalam sistem kerajaan tu tadi. Jadi risiko itu digantikan dengan satu kunci khas yang dibuat oleh kerajaan yang dipanggil MyDigital ID. Jadi banyak sistem-sistem kerajaan ni, umum pun tahu banyak insiden kebocoran, yang mana insiden-insiden kebocoran ni dia penggodam ni bukan dia macam dalam cerita Mission Impossible tu Nabilah kan, terus masuk macam tu je. Biasanya ada sebab-sebab access credential yang dia dapat sama daripada pengguna ataupun daripada kaki tangan yang menjaga sistem tu. Daripada pengguna pun sendiri, penggodam ni boleh mengeksploitasi lah ID pengguna tu untuk dia masuk ke dalam satu-satu sistem. That's why kerajaan, sebab hari ni banyak sistem dan aplikasi kerajaan, semakin banyak semakin berkembang, dan kita tengok siapa saja pun jadi kerajaan di Malaysia ni, dia akan teruskan agenda pendigitalan tu sebab itu adalah arus pemodenan dunia ataupun arus pendigitalan dunia. Jadi untuk mengurus isu itu yang sekian lama menjadi masalah. That's why MyDigital ID itu diperkenalkan. Dan ia pula ditekankan soal keselamatan cyber, kerajaan meletakkannya di bawah kepimpinan Agensi Keselamatan Cyber Negara, iaitu di bawah Majlis Keselamatan Negara secara tak langsung lah. So that's why pengumuman yang akan telah dibuat oleh kerajaan, iaitu bulan ni akan berlakunya pemusatan tunggal penggunaan MyDigital ID terhadap aplikasi kerajaan, telah pun berlaku dan akan berlaku kepada semua aplikasi seperti CPJ, termasuk juga yang diumumkan ialah MyNIISe ataupun aplikasi yang dikeluarkan oleh pihak immigration. Dan saya rasa ia adalah satu keputusan tepat untuk ancaman cyber yang semakin jelas hari ini. Walau bagaimanapun ada banyak perkara yang perlu pihak kerajaan titik beratkan, sebab isu-isu keselamatan cyber ini akan sentiasa ada, dan bila pengumuman itu dibuat, ada pihak-pihak mungkin yang tak bertanggungjawab ni akan mula mencari jalan bagaimana nak mengeksploitasi lah. Jadi ada benda yang kita boleh kena tengok supaya ia adalah satu usaha yang sangat bagus, dan kita sangat menyokong kerajaan untuk membantu mempertingkatkan kaedah keselamatan cyber di kalangan pengguna itu sendiri. Tetapi perlu diingatkan jugalah, maknanya supaya elemen-elemen ataupun loophole yang mungkin berpotensi, sekarang tak ada lagi tapi berpotensi, perlu diambil di titik berat oleh pihak kerajaan.
Baik, itu adalah antara risiko apabila satu aplikasi digunakan sebagai log masuk tunggal. Tapi satu persoalanlah yang diutarakan kebanyakan pengguna, apa beza sebenarnya MyNIISe dengan My Border Pass ini? Jadi itu antara, ialah bagaimana kita nak bezakan, sebab sekarang ada lambakan app, bukan saja untuk bila kita travel, ada juga app-app lain. Jadi bagaimana kita nak bezakan, dan adakah masih perlu My Border Pass itu, Siraj?
Saya rasa MyNIISe dengan My Border Pass ni ada dua benda berbeza. Dan sebelum ke MyNIISe dan My Border Pass dan apa-apa aplikasi lain, ramai juga yang keliru. Saya pun baca komen di platform media sosial. Ada yang tanya, kenapa dah ada MyNIISe, kenapa nak ada lagi MyDigital ID? Ramai rakyat keliru MyDigital ID tu. Dulu pun ramai rakyat keliru. Dia ingat rasa macam MyDigital ID ni satu benda yang nak kena ambil data lagi, dan dia akan kawal ini, kawal itu. Bagi saya adalah tidak tepat. Kan, MyDigital ID ni nak gantikan mekanisme. Kenapa orang buat ID dan password tu adalah tujuannya untuk keselamatan. Kita mengakses profil kita dalam satu-satu perkhidmatan. That's why bila kaedah itu telah consider lapuk dan menjadi punca utama masalah keselamatan cyber, akhirnya mereka pihak yang bertanggungjawab menjaga keselamatan cyber ini perlulah memikir dan menghasilkan satu kaedah yang baik. That's why MyDigital ID ini adalah kunci digital untuk akses kepada sistem-sistem anda sendiri, dan data itu adalah data yang disahkan oleh JPN, bukan data baru yang kita kena manage. Jadi aplikasi seperti MyNIISe ini memiliki data-data sensitif lah. Maknanya setiap orang kita ni yang ada buat pasport di immigration, atau automatik ada data kita. Jadi untuk akses secara digital, yang mana pihak immigration pun dah pun mendigitalkan perkhidmatan mereka. Jadi wujudlah aplikasi MyNIISe itu yang memerlukan satu elemen keselamatan untuk kita akses ke sistem tu. Dulu kita masuk ID dan password. Hari ni dia dah beralih kepada MyDigital ID untuk akses sistem MyNIISe itu tadi. Semasuklah kata My Border Pass. So MyNIISe dan My Border Pass ni dua benda berbeza. MyNIISe tu adalah untuk identiti kita di immigration. Sama lah macam kita pegang pasport. Untuk kita nak buat pasport, kena ada IC. Kalau orang tu tak ada IC, tak dapat buat pasport Malaysia tu. So ada IC, adanya pasport. Jadi pasport tu adalah prakelayakan untuk kita boleh ke luar negara. My Border Pass tu adalah sistem di sempadan untuk kita nak cross luar negara. Jadi ada dua sistem berbeza. Ada tiga sistem berbeza. MyDigital ID, MyNIISe dan juga My Border Pass. Secara hakikatnya, ia adalah pendigitalan tiga kaedah untuk kita nak keluar negara. Kalau tak ada sistem tu, Nabilah, maknanya kita secara fizikal pun kita kena ada IC. Ada IC baru boleh buat pasport fizikal. Bila dah ada pasport baru boleh cross border. Kan tiga benda berbeza tu. Jadi dia pendigitalan itu mengikut itu juga. Maknanya takrifan IC kita digitalkan menjadi contohnya MyDigital ID. Kemudian MyNIISe itu pasportnya ada pendigitalan mekanisme jadi pasport kepada MyNIISe, dan juga sistem dulunya chop di kaunter tu adanya ganti dengan My Border Pass. So dia melalui fasa pendigitalan. Sama juga di JPJ. Maknanya sebelum ni kita pergi kaunter JPJ, kita akan ada lesen secara fizikal. Hari ni kita cukup ada aplikasi MyJPJ. Untuk kita berurusan dengan JPJ, kita perlukan IC sebelum ni. Hari ni kita perlukan MyDigital ID, itu mengesahkan diri kita berurusan dengan digital JPJ. Jadi kalau konsep ni kalau rakyat faham, and then mudahlah nak kita ni berurusan. Jadi urusan digital ni ancaman nombor satu dia keselamatan cyber. That's why digital ID itu sendiri adalah satu perkhidmatan yang diwujudkan oleh kerajaan menjadi asas keselamatan kepada setiap rakyat Malaysia yang ada kad pengenalan, dan ia memastikan kita ni taklah dieksploitasi oleh penjenayah cyber itu sendiri.
Jadi saya harap sekarang dah jelas kepada semua pengguna-pengguna perlu sediakan ketiga ini, MyDigital ID, MyNIISe dan juga MyBerpas untuk travel nanti. Tapi kita ada lebih kurang 2 minit je. Nak juga saya tanya satu soalan ni. Setakat yang kita rekodkan, MyNIISe kini mencatat hampir 600,000 muat turun dan lebih 287,000 pengguna berdaftar. Jadi pada pandangan Siraj lah, apa cabaran utama yang mungkin timbul apabila peralihan kepada MyDigital ID ini diwajibkan kepada semua pengguna warga Malaysia? Adakah akan wujud mungkin risiko digital divide, contohnya mungkin golongan warga emas, pekerja migran ataupun pengguna kurang celik digital apabila MyDigital ID diperlukan untuk akses perkhidmatan immigration? Siraj.
Saya setuju, risiko sentiasa akan ada, dan risiko terbesar di dalam platform digital ini akan wujud lebih ketara sekiranya komunikasi pihak kerajaan tidak jelas. Dalam penyampaian digital ini, komunikasi sangatlah penting. Sebab bila komunikasi tidak jelas, maka wujud kekeliruan. Bila ada kekeliruan, di sinilah penjenayah ni akan ambil kesempatan. Dia tengok ada orang tak tahu, tak faham, khususnya kelompok warga, kelompok rentan, warga emas, ataupun kelompok yang baru nak menggunakan perkhidmatan tu tadi. Dan akan ada elemen-elemen seperti phishing link, ataupun phishing link ni terlalu jargon jugalah untuk setengah kelompok. Phishing link ni kena cerita adalah pautan palsu yang menyamar menjadi identiti ataupun entiti rasmi tadi. So akan adalah pautan palsu yang menyamar jadi immigration ke, pautan palsu yang menyamar jadi MyNIISe tu tadi ke. Bila kita klik sebenarnya bukan MyNIISe yang betul lah, MyNIISe yang palsu. So penjenayah ni akan sentiasa gunakan mekanisme pemalsuan, penipuan. Ini memang nak menipu orang ramai. Jadi kita ni tanggungjawab pengguna, bila dengar pengumuman cakna, pergilah explore. Janganlah time baru nak pakai nanti barulah explore. Tak salah pun explore. Walaupun tak pergi travel lagi, tak pergi nak guna lagi pun pasport kita, tapi at least explore lah. Tengoklah muat turun dan kenal pasti. Kemudian tanggungjawab penyedia platform tu tadi perlulah agresif dalam membuat penyampaian supaya tidak ada kekeliruan di kalangan rakyat atau pengguna ni untuk menggunakan perkhidmatan tu tadi. Dan maknanya di secara keseluruhan peringkat kerajaan, komunikasi tentang apa-apa mekanisme pendigitalan seperti yang diumumkan log akses tunggal. Rakyat banyak yang tak faham. Jadi komunikasi kerajaan mungkin perlu dipelbagaikan lagi dan perlu dibentuk kaedah komunikasi berstrateginya supaya tidak ada orang yang terlepas dalam memahami apa yang kerajaan cuba sampaikan. Dan kita tak nak juga ada kelompok yang disalah taksib penyampaiannya dengan elemen-elemen seperti konspirasi, elemen-elemen ada nak mengawal dan sebagainya. Bagi saya tak betul, dan ada ruang untuk mana-mana pengguna pergilah tanya dengan kerajaan. Janganlah tanya kat Facebook tu mengharapkan orang lain tolong komen dan tolong reply. That's why kelemahan yang dalam sistem digital, tak ada sistem digital yang 100% okey, jaminan 100%. Tak. Tetapi akan ada kelompongan dan mengikut masa akan ada. Tetapi kita tidak dapat mengelak pendigitalan itu daripada terus berkembang dan berlaku. That's why fungsi kerajaan melibatkan MyDigital ID itu, kita lihat manifestasi usaha kerajaan itu diletakkan di bawah agensi keselamatan cyber itu sendiri. Maknanya NAKSA mengetuai usaha ini dan untuk memastikan apa yang diusahakan oleh kerajaan itu sentiasa selamat dari aspek keselamatan cybernya.
Okey, Siraj, thank you so much kerana bantu kami faham. Saya faham transformasi digital inilah sebuah perkara yang kompleks tapi bukan rocket science juga. Jadi kita perlu ambil inisiatif untuk eksplor dan cakna tentang perkara ini. Jadi terima kasih diucapkan sekali lagi kepada Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Cyber Malaysia MCCA Muhammad Sirajuddin Jalil. Kita terus ke perkembangan antarabangsa. The S&P 500 ended lower on Wednesday, pulled down by declines in JP Morgan, Blackstone and other financials, while Nvidia and Alphabet lifted the Nasdaq as investors shifted to AI-related stocks. The drop in the S&P 500 followed an intraday record high earlier in the session. Nvidia, Microsoft and Alphabet rose as investors shifted back into AI stocks following recent worries they were overvalued. The S&P 500 lost 23.89 points to end at 6,920.93 points, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 37.102 points to 23,584.28. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 466 points to 48,996.08.
For today, as you know, we have obviously a mixed market, but a lot of it is just still digesting some of what's gone over the last few days. We've had a pretty strong start to the year in 2026. Some of the things that had kind of fallen by the backside a little bit towards the end of the year surged early to start this year. We've had a lot of kind of give and take. Start of a new year, start of a new month even can be a lot of just people repositioning, whether it's new money coming in that they're investing or just rebalancing. So we try not to read too much into it. I think the big picture here is we're off to a very strong start, but it's following a very strong couple of years. And, you know, we've seen an increase in volatility. For example, last year we had a pretty big pullback early in the year. We expect that to kind of continue this year as well. It's year 2 of an election cycle and so forth. So I think people are still trying to figure out, you know, how do they want to be positioned? What are the things that they don't own that they'd like to own? You're just going to see a lot of, I think, give and take in terms of leadership and maybe a little bit of a pause, you know, after the strong start. That wouldn't surprise us at all.
Oil prices fell on Wednesday as US President Donald Trump's plan to refine and sell Venezuelan crude oil raised concerns about the long-term impact of US actions. The United States said on Wednesday it has seized a Russian-flagged Venezuela-linked tanker as Trump pushes to dictate oil flows in the Americas and force Caracas socialist government to become its ally. Market reaction to Trump's Venezuela moves have so far played out mostly in commodities. China, which imported 389,000 barrels per day of Venezuelan oil in 2025, on Wednesday denounced Trump as a bully in response to his claim that he had convinced Caracas to divert crude supplies away from Beijing. US crude fell $1.14 to settle at $55.99 a barrel, and Brent fell 74 cents to settle at $59.96. The US seizure and boarding of the Russian-flagged oil tanker Marinera, formerly the Bella 1, is a move bound to raise tensions with Russia and risk escalation, a sanctions expert has warned on Wednesday. Gonzalo says Eras Queen of the Royal United Services Institute said the shutting off and the boarding of the Marinera tanker after it obtained the Russian flag is a telling example of Washington's hard line on Venezuela sanctions enforcement.
Says noted that Russia has taken a big leap in coming out of the shadows by registering nearly 20 shadow fleet vessels, increasing its legal and environmental exposure if these floating rust buckets cause spills.
Seizing tankers is a very costly measure. Of course, these military operations have their own costs. And then there's a very significant question that has to be answered, which is what will happen to the tanker? How long will the seizing authority be willing to keep this tanker at port? Will it pay for the maintenance? What will happen to the crew and the cargo? These are questions that have traditionally deterred coastal states from taking such actions. The US is really reshaping the playing field in this regard. The US has been sanctioning Venezuela shadow fleet tankers for quite some time now, over 50 of them in this case, and still dozens of them still oil-laden lurk around the region under the blockade, and many of them are choosing, when they're en route to Venezuela, to turn back, exemplifying the impact that these measures are taking. The US has chosen to target these vessels to prevent the breach of sanctions on the country and monitor the flow of oil under the newly signed deal of 30 to 50 million barrels into the US, and ensure that rogue operators do not jeopardize these operations and ensure US control over these flows.
Despite this, he said the US was not deterred and pressed ahead with the operation. The US seized 2 Venezuela-linked oil tankers in the Atlantic Ocean on Wednesday as part of the President Donald Trump's aggressive push to dictate oil flows in the Americas and force Venezuela's socialist government to become an ally. After capturing Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a Saturday military raid on Caracas, the US is escalating its blockade of vessels that are under sanctions and going to and from the South American country, a member of the OPEC oil group. The White House also said it plans to roll back some of the sanctions Trump placed on Venezuelan oil in 2019 during his first term.
All right, stay tuned for more updates after this with my colleague Ibrahim Sani. We'll go for a short break. We'll be right back.
Kerajaan Negeri Selangor akan melancarkan program pemberian vaksin influenza secara percuma di 4 daerah yang mencatatkan kadar jangkitan tertinggi. Pemilik atau pemandu kenderaan asing khususnya dari Singapura yang gagal memiliki atau mengaktifkan permit kemasukan kenderaan VEP tidak dibenar keluar Malaysia selagi tidak membayar saman. Kekerapan gangguan perkhidmatan aerotrain di lapangan terbang antarabangsa Kuala Lumpur KLIA tidak boleh diterima.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Well, 2026 is well underway, and of course, while we're still trying to figure out what is to expect from 2026, we might want to do a review of 2025 as well. And do a quick recap. Here to talk this and more is Oi Kok Hin, the political and policy analyst. Kok Hin, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, Let's talk a little bit more in terms of what you think 2025 worked and what didn't work. And if you had to sum up Malaysia's economy and governance landscape in 2025 in one sentence, what would be your review on this?
Thanks, Ibrahim. I think maybe the question for me, the sentence would be a year of experimentation. You are seeing that the government perhaps increasingly confident with its majority, and they start to take some experimentation. For example, we see Budi 95, the fuel subsidy rationalization that is, hopefully rolling. It's something that multiple governments, consecutive governments have been talking about it, all the prime ministers talk about it, but to actually execute it is a different matter, right? And I think the government is slowly implementing steps, putting mechanism in place to ensure that if and when the time comes, they can roll out that rationalization. I would say, if you look at SARA as well, the RM100 monthly aid for Malaysians through the e-Kasih, extremely poor households, I think that is a good policy as well. Of course, it's questionable. I think some critics have mentioned that if there's one-off announcement, RM100 to everybody, I think if such a universal blanket policy, if you have a broad tax base, you boleh lakukan. Kan, universal tax benefits, universal basic income. But if you don't have a broad tax base, it may make sense to limit it, target it to, let's say, for example, the B40, and maybe give them more than RM100, for example, rather than you give RM100 to some T20 people, which is not even enough to fuel their very expensive cars and so on. However, I understand the rationale to do universal blanket policy, where in some countries they tax the rich quite high, and this is what they get in return because it's a society, everybody gets the benefits. But we don't have that in Malaysia. Our tax rate is quite low. Our corporate tax, inheritance tax, for example, apa lagi, capital gains tax dan sebagainya amat kurang lah. So I think the government is struggling with that tax revenue as well.
Now, we saw the slew of announcements made by the Prime Minister at the start of the year. Mostly positive reviews, but there are detractors that say things like along the lines of these reforms come at a time when his political base is currently wavering. There's also other detractors saying that of all the political reforms, these ones, while it's nice to have, there are much more critical reforms that needs to be done. And of course, DAP, for instance, have said after the Sabah elections that they might pull out or they might rethink their position if no reforms are done in 6 months. How do you read this situation when it comes to PMX issuing these kind of reforms, including term limits for the Prime Minister and many more?
Yeah. I think that's the interesting things about political reform. You would think that, okay, let's say a political party, a coalition that comes to power, campaigning, promising reform, will implement reform. But actually, the reform doesn't happen like that. What you see in real life is reforms happen when, let's say, a government, a political party is feeling unsure about its, political stability and sebagainya. Contoh, we have Ismail Sabri, who came in the time that, when Tan Sri Muhyiddin just lost his majority after UMNO pull out. Again, we are reliving this drama again in this time. But Ismail Sabri managed to sign an MOU with the federal opposition at the time, Pakatan Harapan, to implement several major reforms, including UD 18 constitutional amendment and implementation and so on. You also have the anti-hopping law done during Ismail Sabri's time, right? He didn't come in as someone who promised reform, but he implemented it because that was the situation. Coming back to 2025, you see that as well in when you mentioned DAP and Pakatan Harapan after the Sabah state election. There is now the urgency to act. And I think that has been missing in the first 2 or 3 years of the Madani government, right? It's, okay, how do you hold together this fragile majority? It's not a very forward-looking thing. I think in their third year, they are starting to, like I mentioned earlier, take some risk, experimentation. I think with that Sabah state election result, I think that kind of pushed them over the edge a little bit in the sense that, okay, we cannot be comfortable anymore. We have to do things. Like, whether we do or do not do things, the political situation is always changing. So might as well we try to push for the reform that we want. And, in a way, it's either like you live or die by your own sword, right?
Yeah.
Rather than if you tak buat apa-apa, you die anyway, right? So I think there's that coming to terms with that political reality. And I think it's a good thing that this is the new political reality of our country.
There's also other political reforms that was announced that I would assume there wouldn't be any friction towards it. For instance, the separation of the AG and the public prosecutor. There's also elements of trying to widen the universal basic income that we speak of. One of seems to be the situation now, but the Prime Minister did not rule out further disbursements of income as well. Do you feel that that also is another element of him trying to push forward some ideas on widening the tax base that all prime ministers since I think since Najib trying to widen the tax base? These reforms take time, but do you feel that there's no bite towards coalition partners trying to make these reforms? Because only Pakatan Harapan wants these reforms, but other members within the unity government might not necessarily have that kind of feel for these kind of reforms?
Yeah. So I think we are addressing several things at the moment. So let's take a step back. When we talk about AG-PP separation, I think a lot of members of the public may not be fully, be aware or support this thing. Oh, what is this about, right? Actually, it is a big change because you're talking about separating the government's lawyer, which means the lawyer that will act on behalf of the government when it comes to, let's say, somebody sue the government or the government is trying to, wrestle batu putih, for example, and the role of pendawat raya, which is the public prosecutor. The very clear case of why this is important is when certain political leaders were charged in court, and then when they win power, they instruct the, as the government lawyer to drop the case. So that's when you happen the conflation of the two roles. So separating it is a big step towards institutional reform, strengthening. Of course, the devil is in the details. We do not know exactly what the provision the bill will be, but this is a major step towards reform if done right. And I think we have to credit the Madani government for willing to bite the bullet on this. On the tax and fiscal and sebagainya, you were right when I think during Prime Minister Najib's time he implemented at least GST, right? It's a broader tax base, although some people will criticize it's not very progressive because everyone kena, kan? Whether you're poor or not, you Bali ni pun you kena dan sebagainya, kan? But there are also other forms of tax that we can look at. Capital gains tax, inheritance tax, for example. I think if you earn, let's say, 5,000 ringgit a month, right, working, and then your annual income is what, perhaps 60,000 ringgit, you get tax. But if you inherit property worth millions of ringgit, suddenly you don't get tax or tax very little. I think that's a form of wealth inequality. That means inequality doesn't occur through your labor income, tapi through the assets and wealth that you own. And that's where I think the government may have to look at as well. I think it's also, I would caution also looking at certain political party or actors sebagai, oh, they need progressive, they push for certain tax reform, but others don't. Actually, it doesn't work like that in real life. There is some people or institution that we would think is progressive, but in the back scene, they're actually the one resisting certain form of, let's say, tax wealth distribution. These things are real, and I think perhaps what's needed is a concerted effort among the progressive in different faction party to come together and say, okay, we need to push this jointly in different our own parties dan sebagainya.
We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Oi Kuk Hin.
Kementerian Pendidikan bertanggungjawab sepenuhnya terhadap keselamatan murid dan pelajar sewaktu mereka di sekolah.
Malaysia dan Korea Selatan terus memperkukuh kerjasama dalam bidang teknologi hijau dan kecerdasan buatan AI menerusi pelaburan dua syarikat utama Republik itu.
SPRM akan meneliti dan menjalankan siasatan sekiranya dapat unsur rasuah dalam pelaksanaan projek Aerotrain di KLIA yang dilaporkan sering mengalami gangguan perkhidmatan.
Thanks for staying on with us. I have in the studio with me Oi Kuk Hin, a political and policy analyst. Kuk Hin, let's talk a little bit more about the decision shift. If 2026 could be defined by one decision shift in Malaysia's development path, and that path must be changed, what would it be, either politically, institutionally, or even culturally?
My wish list is to move away from neoliberal policy regime. And what do I mean by that is, I think since the time of Dr. Mahathir 1.0, you're starting to see Malaysia shifting towards less public government spend less public money and let private sector dan sebagainya to take over certain form of investment. I'll take one issue which is pet for me, PTPTN, student debt reform, higher education financing, right? So in the past, when you go to university, actually it's very heavily subsidized. You get a lot of derma siswa dan sebagainya to go to university. We see as a public goods, right? Maksudnya semua orang ada hak untuk menikmati pendidikan tinggi. But after the 90s, you see a creation of a loan regime di mana is the individual responsibility, bukan state responsibility to provide education, but it's on you to get a loan, and then you pinjam RM50,000 to finance your 4-year study, and then after that you may not even get a job or a proper paying job after your education, kerja Grab dan sebagainya. But Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim announced in Budget 2026 a shift from that thinking, which is very minor and pilot step, I would say, but it is quite major in terms of what its implication is. So what Prime Minister announced is the government will allocate basically free education for B40 students. That means if you go to a public university and you are from a hardcore poor background, confirm free education. I think they are benefiting about 5,000 recipients in the first year, and this is quite major. This is basically saying, it's not about whether you can afford it or not, but we believe that this is a public goods education. Your kewangan you tak okay, it shouldn't be a barrier for you to enjoy education. So that's a major step. Another one I want to mention is the program called Siswa Sulung. I think this is a credit to not just Anwar but the previous government under Ismail Sabri and so on. This is a program where they support first generation college students. Di mana if you are the first in your family to go to college or university, the government will financially support you. Not through loans, which you have to pay back, right? Loans is very, like individual responsibility. So I think this is a very good step towards, okay, what kind of society we want to be, right? If you are poor, if you are a need-based family, then the state, the society can support you to move out from your poverty dan sebagainya.
I think I don't think anybody would disagree with education and providing all the external support for that. But this is an example of a social economy where the state needs to be well endowed to begin with.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work in vacuum where you want to help out people but you don't tax people at the same time, or you can't find a way to increase your revenue. But in budget 2026, we've seen how the revenue has actually quite dropped from year on year, either from tax collection or from other forms of revenue, such as patronage dividends, for instance. So this does provide some sort of a fiscal pressure towards the government in terms of trying to be a little bit more attentive towards helping the people, but at the same time trying to increase their revenue while ensuring that the economy grows in a stable way. My fear is that we might see a situation where, while we're trying to say reduce the deficit by 5% or something to 4% or even 3% next year or this year now, the hit will be on the development side, i.e., the building of institutions, the upkeeping of the institutions, rather than trying to grow revenue from the top side. This is what I worry. Do you have that kind of view as well, or do you think that the government has what it takes to actually achieve all these various possibilities, increasing revenue, maintaining fiscal deficit or target, or i.e. to reduce it, and to increase welfare state and get more people to benefit from this?
Yeah, I mean, you're on the right track completely. I agree with you. In the US, for example, other than whatever crisis they're going through at the moment, the US punya right-wing actors, when they want to reduce the tax and sebagainya, they don't say we are not for ending poverty and sebagainya. They will in fact go to the tax thing that you mentioned, which is you reduce the capacity of the state to run this program. You don't go after the program themselves. You reduce the state capacity to provide this program. And that is where they come up with terms, for example, like tax relief. If you compare tax breaks, for example, they did they run labs and experiments and so on. Like how do we convince people to support the tax breaks for the rich, right? So if you say tax break, it does feel like a bit cheating, like the rich is getting a break, but you package it balik sebagai tax relief, for example. Then it's like tax is being seen as a pain, a burden imposed on rich people who deservedly got their wealth and sebagainya. So this kind of discourse, I'm sure it's happening in Malaysia as well, and perhaps they do have more significant veto power over our policy making, right? I think maybe this is the conversation that needs to happen in 2026. In fact, maybe the second half of this decade, right? Now we are practically looking at 2026 to 2030, the second half of this decade. I think we need to look at how do we broaden revenue for the state in able to provide the kind of programs, benefits that we want the society to be.
I can tell you with certainty that part is already there in RMK 13 to broaden the base. All eyes are on execution and implementation now. And I think that while the plan is nice to have, do you think that that execution can be done in this administration, or whatever government comes after the general election? That is certainly, everybody's talking about it now already. Do you think that that is the risk that you are looking at?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that risk, and I do want to talk about the whole transition of government power. Okay, if you look at Japan and Australia, for example, would you consider developed countries with relatively functional governments?
Yeah.
Japan and Australia have so many frequent turnover of prime ministers, even more than us. We have 4 prime minister in 8 years. Kita pun macam, dah banyak gila, politically unstable dan sebagainya. But in Japan and Australia, that's normal. And in fact, kalau serve 6-8 years is considered one of the longest tenure, right? But they have functional governments. And I think maybe this is a new reality that perhaps Malaysia can embrace, right? Change of prime minister government doesn't need to lead to political instability dan sebagainya, as long as we have functional institution and competent civil service, public service. I think, you mentioned about execution, I think we need that sort of like competent civil service dan juga institutions that are independent and autonomous that can run things regardless of the political change of the day. Having said that, of course, it's important that whoever is elected has the mandate to change things, right? Otherwise, why bother with elections if I'm voted in power and then so-called deep state will decide everything, right? I think we need to balance both sides, which is there needs to be the ability of continuity, regardless of who is in power, and the mandate of the people to be able to elect the kind of government they want and the policy they wish to implement.
I think that's a very aspirational way of looking at things. Are you optimistic that Malaysia will achieve that kind of balance in the near future?
I wouldn't say it's an achievement of a state. It's more of an equilibrium where you can main tarik tali. You have to achieve a certain equilibrium. Where if you are moved too much in one side or the other, it's not good. I think again, bringing back the US example, if you move too much to the political side, then they are undercutting a lot of bureaucracy that are important to ensure certain, for example, welfare benefits is run, certain science programs, space programs is run. When you just cut it across the board, there are unintended consequences dalam economics we mentioned that the ripple effect dan sebagainya. That, for example, I think very simple one, the tariff, right? US tariff. When they impose tariff coming on from China, they actually U-turn, but they realize that actually it undercut their own industry and sector, right? It's not you're not going to target the Chinese punya ni as they intended.
Let's talk about the aspirations that you have for the people. Malaysia is a very diverse country. We're not homogeneous by any means and measure. Do you think that from language to culture to people to economic development status to geography, because of this diversity, do you think that it might be hard to get the kind of will from the people to ensure that everybody gets the most of what they want instead of just targeting a certain group of populace that might have a stronger say through the political means that they elect?
I think that would be one of the key tests for Malaysia, has been since 1957 or 1963, depending on how you count, is that whole plural society thing, right? I know I was just at a government event recently, and before they start the event, they made us all recite the preamble to Rukun Negara. And in the preamble to Rukun Negara, there is a word that lets membina masyarakat yang progresif dan liberal. And I feel like, wow, like liberal has now become like a negative connotation word in today's Malaysia, but back then it is an aspirational thing. Like we should aspire to this, we as a country. And I think, progressive, liberal, diversity, we perhaps have to take back those terms and recast them in a more positive light, right? That this is not something against our tradition. In fact, this is who we are as a nation since the beginning. And I think it's up to so-called progressive actors to package that narrative effectively. Maybe I will share just one story, right, about diversity and unity. Back when I was young, which is not quite long ago already, I remember reading something by a professor, the late Professor Khoo Kay Kim. He said that when you are a true Malaysian, you often feel very lonely, and I resonate with that quote as a teenager. Because I feel that when you have diverse group of friends, in Malaysia, in most places in Malaysia, you're actually quite alone in that context. Well, people will normally just mingle among their ethnic group. But as I go to college, matriculasi, university, work and play, so I realize that maybe that perspective is not entirely true. Because if you grew up in Kelantan, for example, and your 99% of your friends is Malay, that doesn't make you any less Malaysian. Similarly, if you grew up in somewhere in, Ipoh or somewhere where, it's 60%, 70% Chinese, that doesn't make you any less Malaysian as well. So the diversity part, we have to perhaps recast it as well. There's more than one road to Malaysianness, and there's more than one road to being a Malaysian society. We don't have to force everybody to be homogeneous.
Speak more on that, please, because I think that people forget that those are the origins where we came from. Do you think that the ability for us to take back the ownership of those terms and imbue that from the people who hijack it, is that an active thinking that we must have now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Prime Minister Anwar or Madani government or any future leaders of Malaysia maybe should look up to how Tun Razak managed to do this big vision thing, right? So Tun Razak like he created new economic policy, which today some people might see as very ethnic punya policy. It's a dasar bumi putra dan sebagainya. But it didn't start out as just that, right? It's not an ethnic supremacist argument. The argument is for class restructuring, poverty elimination, and to do that, he brings together very different people. He has some Malay nationalists on board. He has some Harvard professor on board, Jasfalan. He has some socialist, minority Indian, James Puthucheary, and so on board. In fact, Tun Razak was a member of the Fabian Society with the Labour Party back when he was a student in the UK. That doesn't compromise his Malay nationalist credential. And I feel that this is perhaps the spirit that we need today. To be a nationalist, but also one that is rooted in egalitarianism. It's not in ethnic, religious ke apa. Am I making sense here?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think you need that kind of vision building embodied by Tun Razak, and also someone who can bring different people together and has a clear direction of where he want to go. Like whether it's MARA, NEP, apa lagi, mention all the major institutions in Malaysia. Actually, these were brainchild of Tun Razak. And he actually was PM for only like 6+ years. You don't need, PMX just announced a term limit for Prime Minister, right? You don't need 10, 20 years to be a consequential leader of this nation.
Are you feeling that we are deprived of such leaders that comes out from our fabric of society?
Yeah, I mean definitely. But to be fair, if Tun Razak were Prime Minister today, he may not have done those things as well because the context has changed. The power that is in the Prime Minister is less now. Whether it's you're talking about political fragmentation dan sebagainya lah. But I think also we don't start from a clean slate anymore. I think Tun Razak has a more blank canvas to draw, so to speak lah kan. Compared to, basically we are path dependent lah. Kalau dalam academia we call it path dependent. You dah set satu track, you are here now. You don't start from here, so you can't draw from scratch anymore. But I mean there are parallels definitely. Tun Razak started Barisan Nasional, right? From what was it, Perikatan ni kan back then. So he started Barisan Nasional. He even offered the DAP, but the DAP didn't join. But today you have unity government. There's definitely parallels involved, and I think let's not forget Tun Razak is also quite good at cultivating apprentices. So when you talk about Tengku Razali, Mahathir, back then all very young, Musa Hitam and all that, he cultivated them. And I think people often forget Tun Razak was only in his late 20s, I think, when he was Menteri Besar Pahang or one of the leaders lah. And early 30s when he became the Timbalan President UMNO and basically number 2 lah in the country. Nowadays, if you are in your 30s, you'll be assigned to some pemuda role, and by the time you get to top leadership level at 50, 60 years old, you're already bought in with the system. Your thinking semua dah status quo, right? You're a bit absorbed by the need. Usually, I would think people in their 30s and 40s, not to be ageist here, but from my own personal experience, they tend to shake things up. In your teenage years, early 20s, you are just learning the ropes. In your 30s and 40s, you gain enough confidence, you have enough leverage relationship to shake things up. And I think, that's why it's so exciting to see like people like Syed Saddiq when he become minister, full minister at the age of I think 25, 26, right? And that basically shake up the status quo, di mana we expect people to be in your line, wait for your turn. But when you have a full minister at 25, that's something else, right? It's a learning curve for Saddiq or anyone else for that matter. Now today we have Akmal as the Menteri taking over Rafizi's portfolio.
We have Taufik as well, KBS. He's a young guy. I think he's not even 30 yet.
Yeah. And okay, I have to mention this as well because with all the names you mentioned is men. Yobi Yin. When she was minister in 2018, I think she was only in her early 30s, right?
Yeah.
And then she was pregnant on the job and everything, handled basically equivalent to 3 ministry portfolio.
Yeah.
She did really well, I think, to handle that. I mean, she wrote an entire book about it as well. And I think you're looking at people who want to do things, usually in that age. Whether you are in your 50, 60, you are already, I don't want to say past your prime, but you are not thinking in terms of innovation anymore, right?
We have to bring this or land this conversation. Are you optimistic, not just about 2026, but the direction of the country, both politically as well as economic-wise? Do you think that while there's, it goes without saying that there's a lot that needs to be done and there's a lot of institutional reforms that needs to be instituted, but are we moving towards a direction that you believe is the right way?
When you look at so-called radical reformers, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Malcolm X ataupun orang-orang yang dianggap radical, people like Aru, for example, in PSM in Malaysia today, right? When you talk to them, although they always say about what's wrong with our society and all that, but they are actually very optimistic in person. And you almost have to be that way as an activist dan sebagainya, because you believe another world is possible. Itu menggunakan tagline a left group lah, another world is possible. And I feel we have to embrace that mindset in this year and also beyond. What I see lah, satu danger lah, is a lot of people, when reform don't happen at the pace that they want, they just become jaded and cynical and take a back seat. And I think that's a very self-defeatist, almost like self-fulfilling prophecy lah kan. If you think the system don't work and then you just give up, then of course it doesn't work lah kan. You have seen in New York City where, Joran Mamdani basically energized, new groups of people to, be active in the political process, and that leads to, significant change. I think we need that mindset as well in Malaysia. There will not be one miracle in which kalau buat benda ni semua settle. You are in this in the long haul. And I was reading this book called Moral Ambition by Rutger Bregman. Fantastic book, I would recommend it. There's a superb quote in that says, it's not what you believe, it's what you're willing to do about it. So if you believe in a progressive society, inclusive Malaysia, ekonomi yang lebih sama rata, a poor person, whether you are poor Indian girl or a Malay Bumi Putra in Sabah Sarawak, you can come up to the very top. If you believe in that kind of society, what are you willing to do about it to bring about that society to reality?
That requires a lot by the person, instead of just going about and whinge about the situation. We take charge and institute that kind of change ourselves. That is my aspiration as well, because I don't like people complaining if they haven't done anything themselves. In fact, that is my exasperation sebenarnya. I'd rather people do something and fail rather than whinge and not do anything, or not do anything and just whinge. So do you think that is a mindset or cultural shift that we have to espouse to everyone right now? If you want the change that you dream of, it's you that has to do it.
Yeah.
Do you feel that is the moment of time right now?
Yeah, I mean, almost 20 years ago now, a young person used to say to us, be the change that you want to be. Right?
Yeah.
2008. So I think that mindset, basically shifting from a passive actor, whereby things just happen to you, to a more proactive actor in your life, right? Regardless of your role in society, but also in your life, right? Ni macam self-help pula kan. It bring about the society that you want to see. Whether it's it doesn't have to be very big, right? It can be something you do in your neighborhood scale, for example, right? And so on. So I think it's something that, you be the change that you want to be, do even small things that will hopefully create a chain of effects.
What a way to end this conversation. Of course, it's a new year, new you, new me, and there's plenty of conversations like this that can be found on astroawani.com. But while the message is easy to say, it is very hard to do. But of course, if indeed you want to be the change that you are, then perhaps this is a good New Year's resolution to have. Until then, thanks very much for watching. You just heard from Ui Kok Hin, the political and policy analyst. If you want to learn more, head on to our website and find out more of these conversations. You can find there as well. Until then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.